Hi there. Today we will start our Java course for beginners. How we'll progress is we will start coding from day one because there's no better learning than actually applying. So as we code, we will understand the anatomy of coding in general, which is not only applicable for Java, but also for a plethora of different programming languages out there. We will understand the syntaxes, the flow of program, the different elements of this language, and try to solve some easy example programs. Now, some of the things that we will encounter in the beginning, you will have to memorize. It is because it's relatively difficult to explain it without prior coding knowledge than later when we have the necessary prerequisites to cover it. Do not let it discourage you though, because the language per se is fairly easy. So let us begin. First up, we have block. All the code that will be written or that you'll see will be written inside these open and closed curly braces. This is normally what we refer to as a block in Java and in many other programming languages. Here's a visual representation of a block. How we write it is we write some entity, we mention an entity, we open a curly bracket, we write some code there, and we end the curly bracket. What these curly braces do is that they tell the compiler that everything that is written within these curly bracket belong to a certain entity. And we'll discuss what that entity is as we move along. For now, we just have to remember that everything we write inside every code we write. It has to be written inside a block. Next up, we have a semicolon. A semicolon ends an executable line of code, which means it ends a line of code which is self-sufficient to have an effect on the program and its functioning. Now, when the compiler meets a semicolon, it understands that a new line of code will start after it. So as soon as we meet a semicolon in a program, we know that the current line of code has ended, and so a new line of code will start. We will be using some programming language term in this course that you must familiarize yourself with, and your first term is compiler. A compiler is a computer program that translates computer code written in one programming language into another language. The name compiler is primarily used for programs that translate source code from a high-level programming language to a low-level programming language to create an executable program. You may understand you may understand compiler as a translator. Our device, our computer, only understands binary, that is zeros and ones. In order for the computer to understand our code, which are our instructions, there must be a translator that translates our instructions into a language that the computer understands, that is binary. In our case, the compiler converts our language, that is Java, to a simpler language that is computer readable. Because if there was no compiler, we'd have to code our entire programs in binary, and trust me, it's nearly impossible to to represent a huge chunk of code in binary by human hands. I have arranged some key points to what compiler is. You can give it a read. Third, we will be looking at comments. Now, a comment is a statement or multiple statements that do not participate in the execution of the program or are not a part of the code. So what happens when we write large codes that are hundred lines of code, say thousands of lines of code, we may not recognize or understand what we did in the previous lines of code. And to avoid that, the best practice is to document what we are doing. And what I mean by that is that we write what we're doing right next to the code, but at the same time, what we have written must not interfere with the code, and that's where we use comments. Now, these comments, they do not participate in the code, or are not a part of the code per se. They are just there as documents. And how we achieve that is we use two forward slashes, as you may see in this visual representation, two forward slashes, and then we write what we have to write when the documentation. And we can only do this in single lines of code because there are two types of comments. One is single line comment and the other one is multi-line comment. The first one you see on your screen is the single line comment, two forward slashes, and then your message, your code. Yeah, I mean not the code, your documentation. But if it's long and we have to use multiple lines for it, we use a multi-line comment where we use a forward slash and an asterisk, and we have to end this with an asterisk then a forward slash, and we write our text right in between these two asterisks. And this is our multi-line code, so when we change lines and we write the code, it still does not interfere with the code. That is your comments. As we had seen in the previous slides when we were discussing blocks, that blocks belong to a certain entity. So I will use this opportunity to show you what some of these entities are. First up, we're looking at class. You can understand class as a container used for arrangement of code, pretty much like products arranged on a store shelf. Say we write a code to perform a specific task. A class contains this code that we have written, which makes it easy for us to refer to it if we need to use it later, because it has been arranged or stored away in a container. For syntax, what we do is we specify a class, then we give it a name, and then we open its blocks using a parentheses to write the code that it will contain. Once again, the class name. Before that class name, we specify that it is a class. And after the class name, we open the block and we write the code in the block. So the code that is written is contained in a class. To understand classes better, I would like to use an example. Like, say you walk into a store. Now, when you walk into that store, you know that there is a section in that store that has all the kinds of pasta. There's a section that has all the kinds of cookies and the biscuits. So you don't have to search through the entire store to find different kinds of biscuit. You can just go to that section and you'll find all the kinds of biscuit that they have. A class is pretty much the same. We have written a code to perform a certain task and we contain it in a class. Now, to find that code, we don't have to search through the entire file of programs that we have written, because we know that the program, that the code we are looking for is contained inside a class. So we can just refer to the class instead of going through the entire file. Our new term is syntax. In computer science, the syntax of a computer language is the rules that define the combination of symbols that are considered to be correctly structured statements or expressions in that language. This applies to both programming languages, where the document represents the source code, and to markup languages, where the document represents the data. Think of uh, syntax as thumb rules that we need to follow, and we follow syntax in our daily life. Take a name, for example. We follow a very basic structure. We follow a very basic syntax. That is, we first say the pronoun, then the first name, then the middle name, and the last name. So a person's name is, say, Mr. Chandler Muriel Bing. Now, we can't mess up this syntax. We can't jumble it. We can't go first name in the last, the middle name in the first, the pronouns at the end. Like, we can't say Muriel Mr. Bing Chandler. Doesn't make any sense. For someone to understand it, we need to put it together in a correct syntax. Similarly, if we want the compiler to understand our instructions, it needs to be written in a proper syntax. Whenever we write a statement, say our print statement that we discussed earlier, uh, we have system.out.print parentheses and a semicolon. And also the system has a capital S, that's a part of the syntax. So if we write this print statement in this correct syntax, we will get an output, else we'll just get an error because the compiler doesn't understand what we're saying. Our next entity is main method. To fully understand main method, we will have to delve deep in the concept of functions, which we will further in this course. For now, we will understand that main method is where the program starts and ends. Thus, we will be writing all our code inside the main method. And what I mean by that is, when the execution of the program begins, it begins at the main method and it ends at the main method. Needless to say, everything that has to be executed, all the executable code, should be written inside the main method for it to be effectively executed. The syntax, for now, we will have to memorize, but we will understand every keyword and every token that we encounter further as we progress in this course. The syntax goes, we write the words public, static, void, main, then we put parentheses, and inside the parentheses we write string with a capital S. Do not forget the capital S, that's the right syntax. And then args, that stands for arguments. And then we use two braces, the block bracket. And then we start a block with those curly braces. And we end it with curly braces. And all the code that has to be executed is written inside this block. This is our main method. This is where the program starts and ends. The new term is token. Tokens are the smallest element of a program which are meaningful to the compiler. The following are types of tokens: keywords, identifiers, constant, and so on. We'll discuss it. First, let's look at this skeleton of a Java program that I have written. We have a class and we have a main method. Now, every single word in this skeleton of a program that we see is called a token because every single word can be understood by the compiler, whether be it class, be it public, be it static, be it void, be it main. Every single word is identifiable by the compiler, and that's why it's called a token. All of these terms as a whole we'll call a token. Next up, we are looking at a statement of code that is our print statement. This line of code prints a given message. In our example today, we will be printing a message in string form, or in other words, words in layman terms. The syntax is system with a capital S. Do not forget the capital S. I have made my fair share of mistakes with this. It's system.out.print, and then we have open and closed parentheses within which we will be writing our message that is to be printed. In order to print a message in string form, we make use of double quotes, and then we end this whole statement with a semicolon, as you can see on your screen. Strings. In computer programming, a string is traditionally a sequence of characters. Characters here can be letters of alphabet, numbers, operators, emojis, and so on. In Java, we write the sequence of characters within double quotes to represent it as string. Let us look at some examples. Here, hello world, and that exclamation mark, all of it within the double quotes as a part of a string is a string. Generally, even the white space between hello and world and exclamation mark, that blank space you see, Even that is a part of this string. Then we have laugh, the blank space between laugh and the emoji itself, all of it is a string. We have operators there within the double quotes. Every operator is treated as a string. Numbers. So basically everything we have written inside the double quote is a string, and in Java we will treat everything written within the double quote as strings. All right, there you have it. That's the toolkit to write our very first Java program, so let's get to it. I am going to create a new file. Double click on the folder which I want to create a file inside. I'm using VS Code as an IDE, by the way. I create a new file. I name it hello.java. Java is the extension which we use to write a Java program. Then we create a class, just as we had discussed. As you see, VS Code auto-filled this public and hello. We will disregard this public at first. We will look at hello. One thing you need to notice is that whenever we create a file, the file name and the class name should be same in Java. That's one thumb rule you must follow. Now we create our main method. As we had discussed, a main method is contained inside a class. Write public, write static, then we write void, we write main, open parentheses, capital S string, args stands for arguments, you square brackets, then you open the block. Now we write our program. We write a statement of code, the executable line of code, as we discussed, because the execution of programs starts at main and ends at main, so everything has to be inside the main. So inside main, we write our print statement, that is system dot out dot print. Then we open parentheses, and as we had discussed, we are going to be printing this message in string form. So to print a message in string form, we make use of double quotes, and inside these double quotes we write our message. This tells the compiler, the program, that everything that is written inside these quotes is string. So we will write our first hello world program. It is a very popular convention among coders that we write hello world as our first program. It's more like the computer is saying hello to the world, because you're bringing it to life as you write the code. And then we write our print statement, and we end it with a semicolon. We save our file and we execute it. You see, we have our message printed, hello world, which is exactly what we had written here. This was our message. This is the string we printed. So let's go through what we have discussed once again. We learned what a block is. A block is used by curly. So let's understand what. So let's go through what we have discussed today. We discussed what a block is. We write all our code. We write a code inside the block, and it belongs to a certain entity. We discussed our first entity, that is a class. A class is arrangement of code. Inside a class, we have our main method. This is the second entity we discussed. We discussed its syntax, and we discussed that whenever the program is executed, the execution starts at the main method and ends at the main method. Then we discussed our print statement. We have the syntax system.out.print and parentheses. We discussed how we print messages with using print statement. In string form, we use double quotes and we write our message within the double quotes. And that was it. That was your first Hello World program in Java. Thank you.